Hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Adam Dorsey, a psychologist in Silicon Valley, and I am the host of Super Psyched, a podcast dedicated to supercharging your life. Each episode contains fun, high-quality interviews with experts looking at psychology from all angles. Super Psyched is your tool to get more of what you want in your life and less of what you don't. I'm going to take a guess. Like me, you probably love coffee. This wasn't a huge stretch on my part because you're listening to this episode. Coffee has been a major industry for hundreds of years, and it has contributed to cultural, philosophical, and technological changes, as you will hear in this episode. I am so delighted to have Dr. Shawn Steiman as a guest. Shawn holds a PhD in horticulture from the University of Hawaii. Virtually all of his classes pertained to the cultivation of coffee. So as verified by Shawn, he basically has a doctorate in coffee. He is also the sole author on 3 books about coffee and the co-author of a comprehensive book on coffee that is called Coffee, a comprehensive guide to the bean, the beverage, and the industry. I learned a lot, and you will too, about a favorite hot beverage and how it changed the world. Listen in as Shawn and I geek out on coffee and look at it from every fascinating direction imaginable. Dr. Shawn Steiman, who I'll be calling Shawn, welcome to Super Psyched.
I am super pleased to be here. Thank you.
I couldn't be happier. I loved your book so much, and I had to do a coffee episode. It is one of my favorite passions in life. It's one of the things I look forward to most in the day. I'm sure you do too. And who could possibly be better? You have a doctorate in horticulture, specializing in coffee from the University of Hawaii. You live in Hawaii. You have a solid business in coffee in Hawaii. From where I sit, you have cracked the code for a great life. But first off, let's hear a little bit about you, who you are, what you studied, and how you got into coffee.
My mother was great. She let me drink coffee pretty young. It was probably like coffee flavored milk for a long time. I grew up in middle upper class suburb of Kansas City called Overland Park. I spent my first 18 years and went to Hebrew Day School. I remember when the school moved to the new Jewish Community Center, big, beautiful building. And the school was incorporated. All the Jewish stuff in town was sort of moved to this one building. There was a little cafe there. And during lunch in 5th grade, the woman who ran this little cafe was a friend of ours. We used to go camping with her family, old friend of my mom's. So I went in one day and said, "Can I have a cup of coffee?" She's like, "Of course not." Like, "What do you mean?" She's like, "You're way too young for coffee." She says, "You bring me a note from your mother. I'll let you drink coffee." So I did. I went home, got a note from my mother. So in my head, like, this is the first significant moment, although clearly I was drinking it before. But really the turning point was this when I was a freshman in high school. I made this friend with an artist. I was always a scientist and I was in honors biology, and there's an artist who sat right in front of me. I don't know to this day why he was in that class. I think he was just branching out, and we became really good friends. And he was into coffee. And this was in the early 90s. So like coffee wasn't really a thing yet in the country as part of our mental attitude. And he just sort of brought me to attention that coffee is not just the magical thing that comes out of a pot. Like there's a little more to it. And I adored this guy. So I started adoring that idea of coffee. And someone gave me a book for a present. And then I got to college and had all this time to, geek out. I went to Oberlin College. And in Oberlin, what's great about Oberlin is that they do a semester that's in January. It's like a 3-4 week thing. And you have to do one project on anything. As long as the professor will sign off on it, you can do this project. And you could really do something amazing with those 3 weeks. You can do it anywhere in the world. Or you can totally blow it off, right? You just need a professor to sign off on it. And my first year, this was 1997, and I was still really into coffee, and there was no good website yet because the internet was still pretty young. So I said, I'm going to make an informative website. And so I spent 3 weeks reading about coffee and writing this website, and realized all of a sudden I knew something about this thing that I loved so much. And they just kept going. Class projects I would do on coffee if it was an open assignment. And you just had a coffee pot and espresso machine in my room. So on campus, like I was known as like that guy. And then I guess the next really important moment of truth is waking up that one day in college and thinking, oh my God, this is going to end. What am I going to do next? And as a biology major, I thought, biology to me thus far was like pipetting in labs. Like, this is cool stuff in a lab, but every day I couldn't do that. I just had no idea. Nobody had sat me down. Nobody had said anything. No parent was like, oh, we got to talk about your future. I had no idea. So I started panicking. And I knew I loved school and I was pretty good at it. And one day I was in the airport returning to college, and I read an article in Popular Science magazine about, it was like a tiny little column, miniature piece of column about some research at UH on folks who were looking at decaffeinating coffee. And I remembered that article, and I thought, oh, I should go do stuff in Hawaii with coffee. That would be cool. So
Totally.
I wrote a bunch of people looking for a summer internship. It didn't play out, but I'd made connections with a professor there. So after some time had passed, and I'd made a relationship with the professor. I'd done a bunch of coffee stuff. He and I both sort of accidentally, simultaneously, unrelated, thought, oh, maybe grad school in Hawaii is the way to go. I had no idea what grad school was. I had no idea what it entailed. I just knew it was school, and I liked school, and I was good at it. And I got to go to Hawaii and maybe study coffee. All right, how bad could that be? So sight unseen, moved to Hawaii to study with this professor to get a master's degree, which I thought would be 2 years, ended up being 3. Just amazing experience. Me and my advisor were an amazing fit. And coming from Oberlin, I was well prepared for anything. In fact, I did more free reading when I got to Hawaii than I'd ever done in my life because I had so much spare time. And that was great. And then I had all these questions because now I'm like a student who's really thinking about the topic. And we're discussing it with professors and people who cared about ideas. And I thought, I should just keep doing this. Why not? I have no other plans. So I stayed on for the PhD and did that.
And that was in horticulture, specializing in coffee cultivation in some way, if I understood correctly?
Both of my degrees are technically in horticulture, but really I just focused everything on coffee. So I had to take classes that were obviously not coffee focused. There are no coffee classes.
Even if it's not on paper, essentially you have a doctorate in coffee.
Yes, that's correct. Coffee
science would be a good way to say it. So that said, I mean, first of all, fantastic. Well done. That's incredible creativity. What are some common misconceptions about coffee, or perhaps more simply things you wish people knew about coffee but often don't?
I'm going to do the most common one because still decades after the data's come out, people still don't know that coffee does not dehydrate you. Caffeine.
Really?
Well, coffee does not, because coffee is mostly water, and you drink coffee and you pee, but you replace it all with the water. As if you drink a glass of water. In fact, if you pee, you lose as much water drinking coffee as you do drinking water.
That's fascinating. If I recall correctly, the figure was 1.5% coffee for a cup of coffee and about 5% coffee versus 95% water for espresso. Is that right? In
that range, yeah.
That's amazing. Okay, so that is an incredible misconception. Are there any others?
Yes, another huge one. I'm going to say this out loud because it's still not well known. There's this amazing statistic that coffee people love to throw out, that coffee is the second most traded commodity in the world.
Yeah.
Behind petroleum. You see that everywhere. And the first time I've been able to trace it back to a book on my shelf is 1985, which means it started before that. And as a good scientist, when I started writing books, I thought, well, I need to prove this idea. Started trying to look for an answer, trying to back it up. Couldn't find it. Contacted a famous historian, Mark Pendergrass, who wrote a book called Common Grounds. He agreed with me, like, this is all right. We contacted this really amazing researcher who's at University of Jamaica. We're all conversing, and like none of us can prove it. So we conclude, this is wrong. This is just not true. And it hasn't been in most conditions for a long time. And the conditions it was true were like if.
Right.
So coffee is hugely important as a commodity in the world. Lots of governments and people depend on it. Absolutely true. And it's not more important than things that people eat.
That is a great point. Now, that said, since it appears in different countries and coffee itself has a different relationship in almost every country it touches, and coffee impacts countries that it goes to as well. There's kind of this interesting symbiotic relationship that coffee seems to have different relationships to the countries it resides in. You describe 9 different countries in your book. Fantastically described. Can you describe how coffee impacts culture and how culture impacts coffee?
The countries that have a strong coffee relationship, that we thought was a strong coffee relationship, we really wanted to have someone talk about that. And when you start digging around, you think, well, a lot of countries, we think South America has a lot of coffee, and they do grow more than anywhere else as a continent. And Brazil still more than anybody else. A lot of these countries started coffee not because it was there, they wanted to. It's because white Europeans wanted coffee, and so they found colonies and had slaves, and there's a very dark history to coffee.
Oh my God.
And you can't have the conversation without mentioning that, but that was a long time ago, and there's obviously repercussions for what happened in the past.
Sure.
But now you have countries that really, coffee is part of their national identity because it's been grown by so many people, and now it's becoming a consuming thing. And one of the funny things about coffee is that because of this historical relationship of the rich West having it grown for them, is that local people it wasn't part of their culture. They didn't drink it really. So the idea that a lot of places that grow coffee drink coffee is pretty new.
Sure.
And so we have this historic relationship of identity of like, this is something we grow as farmers. Now it's something that we care about as drinkers. And that's really neat. And one of the reasons Hawaii is so neat is because it's always kind of been both in its history. In a healthier way than other places. Not totally healthy, but healthier.
And I'm kind of thinking about how when I lived in Japan, which obviously doesn't grow coffee, at least not.
I actually have a tiny little bit on an island very far south.
Really? Okay.
Yeah.
That's news to me. I wouldn't think of them as a major producer of coffee.
They're not at all.
But they are historically very big consumers of the product, in spite of the fact that tea is often the drink that is imagined to be there. Coffee is very important there. And it has had an impact on the society. If people wanted to meet, where would they meet? They'd meet at what's called a kisaten, which is a coffee shop. You'd pay rent in the form of buying a very expensive cup of coffee, often extremely delicious coffee, really well prepared. And of course, because it was Japan, it was gorgeous on top of being delicious. And the setting itself was just lovely. I'm just wondering, it's been my impression, just having started David Liss's amazing book, The Coffee Trader, written in 2003, a novel, I believe takes place in the 1600s in Holland. He was describing just life before coffee and then life after coffee. Things change. And I believe it's changed in every country coffee has visited in some way, shape, or form. We can't think of Italy without imagining coffee there.
Sure,
even getting coffee in a not so great place in Italy, the coffee tastes amazing. I don't get it, but it always did. Every place I went, I tried to find a bad cup of coffee there. I couldn't. It's always delicious. It does seem to impact just even the way a street is arranged. You have a cafe, you've got people sitting on the sidewalk, enjoying whatever weather seems to be out there. And I just was wondering, have there been particular impacts of coffee itself onto societies it was introduced to?
Coffee history really starts in Yemen, in the Middle East. And when it finally gets to Europe, there's a little more records and we can do a little more stuff there. And there's always talk that how coffee became something that wasn't alcohol and how that has an influence, both with politics and with finances and with the common folk and the cost of it. There's been very real influences that coffee, or maybe if something else had shown up, it would have been something else, but maybe it was just coffee at the time and place that enabled people to do things, gather and talk in ways that helped influence society.
Sure.
And I mean, from my own personal life, and this is one of the reasons I think our country has such a strong coffee thing, especially now, is that you can drink it before you're 21.
Yep.
And you can go there with your friends. Yep. And it's accessible and it's cheap and it does only good things for you because you get excited and energetic and thoughtful. And that's what we did in high school, right? We went to coffee shops because that was really important. I don't think we recognize those influences as much because when historians talk about influence, they talk about the penny universities in London and how rich and poor gathered together to talk and share ideas. And it was really cheap. So you had this community coming together in ways they weren't coming together before.
So to kind of piggyback on what you were saying, in David Liss's novel, The Coffee Trader, a character says that unlike wine or beer, coffee is the drink of commerce. And from what I've read, that seems to be true. Many business, technological, philosophical, and other innovations appear to have been fueled, at least in part, by coffee. And I was wondering if you could share how coffee may have impacted our thinking and our lives in general.
That's easy because coffee is caffeine. And how the ability to be awake when we're tired has influenced society, I think, is quite significant. Right? It allows things like evening shifts. It allows things like working longer hours. And I'm not talking like today. I'm talking hundreds of years ago when the Industrial Revolution was happening. This is probably a key thing that people had access to. But even today, I mean, how many students have used coffee to get through that paper?
Oh my God. For me, it was inextricably tied to my academic performance.
We all have that. I think a lot of us have that experience as coffee drinkers. I've met a lot of people like, I started drinking coffee in school because I used the caffeine. And so that's a very simplistic way of how it impacts us. But I think if you go to the burgeoning data of specialty coffee and what researchers are doing, there's some famous work in the 90s by some anthropologists. And the anthropologist who coined the term third place, Newberry, and it's a very famous paper, where he's looking at this burgeoning specialty coffee cafe scene. And he's like, well, cafes are the third place. There's home and there's work. And there's that place where you feel like you're at home. You feel like you belong. Yeah. Anyone can go there any time of day. Right in the cafe and Friends.
I was just thinking about that. Totally.
Right.
Central Perk.
That's a very real idea.
It's really a real idea.
Because coffee is so accessible and so affordable, but cafes certainly have become that for a lot of people. Or the identity of I'm carrying a Starbucks. This idea of coffee being the study of anthropologists and sociologists, it's been slow to happen, but it does happen. And it's great to have some third party who's trained to look at these things with a better eye and be like, oh, this is what's going on. This is
exactly.
Weird. People shape their days around getting their coffee. Any airport you go to, the longest line's always at a coffee shop, especially morning flights. That ritual is important, or that drug need is important.
It certainly is. And it's paradoxical. One of the things that society is sorely losing at is sleeping well. And I think that perhaps one of the dark sides of our modern relationship with coffee is it can deceive us to allow us to think that we've had a better night's sleep than we have.
Mm-hmm. Or that we don't need to have a good night's sleep because we can just skip it, right?
Right. But you talk about the third place and Good Will Hunting. And I remember a funny line, and I'm sure it caused you to laugh, where Minnie Driver's character asks Matt Damon out for coffee. And he says, or we could just sit around and eat caramels. And she says, we could sit around and eat caramels. And he said, it's arbitrary what we do. Why does it have to be coffee? Why can't it just be us sitting around eating caramels? And it has become kind of the thing that we ask, like, if we're interested in getting to know somebody, hey, let's go out for coffee. How has that become so much the third place? How has it become so part of our psyche and our vernacular from where you sit? Just even speculating, what are your thoughts associated with that?
From a business perspective, because I used to own a cafe, so I have some reason to think about it from the other side of the table, which is you want people to spend money in your space. So you want to give them a space that they want to hang out in and spend time in, right? Either you come in and you buy your food and you go away and you turn the table at a restaurant, right? But you need lots of turns at a coffee shop because a cup of coffee is pretty cheap. But if you can get someone to stay and hang out and love it and be welcome there and feel comfortable there, they're either going to spend more on food to eat while they're there or more drinks. Or if they love it, that's the thing you're going to tell about to other people. And today it's like, I can go and work on my laptop in this place. And there's a negative side of that, which is you pay, $3 for office space for 4 hours.
Oh my goodness. I've seen that.
Which we've all done. And I always feel guilty about if it's busy.
Because that's about, $30 worth of value. But yeah.
Exactly. But there's incentive for cafes to be that for us. And the evolution of the cafe from the 1960s to the, 2000s in the United States, I don't really have any sense of. But like growing up in the 80s and 90s, this idea of the beatnik cafe, which is a place of intellectualism and fun, cool things. And one of the first cafes my friend took me to was this really cool beatnik style cafe on the other side of town, which I still think very fondly of. But then like the mom and pop store and the chairs you get to sit in and the warm beverage. And I don't know. I don't know, but there's so much about coffee being part of one's identity and being part of what makes them happy that easily makes the space it's offered in, as long as it's not cold, right? Cold and not temperature-wise.
Inviting and warm.
To stay, yeah.
And I really read that idea. And one of the ideas in psychology is the idea of the wire monkey holding food versus the soft monkey not holding food. And where does the hungry baby monkey go? Does it go towards the wired monkey holding the food, or does it go towards the kind of stuffed animal soft monkey? And it always goes to the soft monkey. So one of the crucial elements is giving a good felt experience at your cafe. And that was one of the things that you were really trying to do. I also think about our own self-concept relative to coffee itself. I remember thinking, okay, I drink coffee now. I'm sophisticated. I'm cool. Like, this is really cool. And like a great way to impress a potential date would be like, I know a really cool cafe. Like they play upscale music. You are going to, this will be part of my brand. I don't think that is as much a thing these days as it might have been when you and I were more in the kind of the dating years. But that certainly was a big part of my psyche, and part of the allure of coffee itself was it will add to kind of a level of sophistication in my persona, how I'm perceived by another. Is that consistent with your own idea of coffee itself? Like there's like a mystery or just something very grown up.
I think that's true. Certainly some sophistication, both from a individual's emotional standpoint. I can sort of come up with some cultural ideas too, but it made me think that I remember when I was young, recognizing my mom drank coffee black, and that's what adults do. So I'm going to teach myself to drink it black because it was adult and mature and sophisticated. That was really important to me. It's so ubiquitous now that I'm not sure it holds true as well as it probably did for us back in those days. But I have heard people talk about, I go to this place because this place has a certain cultural attaché to it.
Exactly.
Which tends not to happen as much, at least in Honolulu where I live and have lived for 20 odd years. Like, I've never heard someone say, I went to this restaurant. It was the coolest, hippest place. Everyone is there when it's there. I've never heard that.
Exactly. That's no longer really spoken of, but that has been part of its not so distant history for coffee and its mystique. One of the quotes that I somehow came across was attributable to an old Turkish saying, coffee is black as hell, strong as death, and as sweet as love. And when you hear that, there's just something very mysterious about coffee itself and adds to the intrigue. I still can't understand how back in Ethiopia, or somewhere in the Yemen area, the area where it was first discovered, like how they figured it out. Like, oh, here's some green stuff growing on a tree and it's actually not poisonous. Oh, and by the way, when you roast it and then you grind it and then you somehow pour water through it and then drink it, it is delicious. I cannot wrap my head around how complex that process strikes me as so unfathomable that it even came about as a thing.
So if it's any consolation, I don't know anybody who's offered me a very convincing explanation. What we do know is that before it was drunk, it was consumed as a food because the fruit is a fruit that's sweet, a little stringent, but you could totally eat it, but it also has caffeine. So it's got caffeine and sugar. So we do know that like tribes used to harvest the fruits and mix them up as part of like an energy, part of their fat energy bar thing. It's probably the way it first started. And then how do you remove the layers? There's a lot of processing with coffee. Same with chocolate, by the way. Like the idea that these two things were processed the way we know them today. How many steps transpired before someone's like, oh, this is actually worth doing now?
Totally. Chocolate came to mind as well, like as a very kind of a similar, unlikely byproduct of people's creativity and putting things together. And thank God we are now the beneficiaries of these incredible substances.
That's right. That's right.
By the way, just so the listeners understand what's going on in the background, I can only infer from the noise in the background that you have a child.
I do have a child. A funny result that's influenced my coffee habit. Before we had a child, I had, 10, 11 different ways of making coffee. And I would like circulate through really like 3, 4, 5 of them, but not all of them. But I had all these things. I would change it up every day. But clearly when child, then really I have an electric drip coffee pot. And every morning I make coffee, almost every morning I make coffee in the electric drip. I set it up, I do it. And for a while, my daughter would help me. She'd stand up on her stool and she'd pour the coffee in the grinder. She'd turn the switch. And it was really like, that was an amazing couple of weeks for me when she was doing that.
Oh, that's so coffee. Sweet.
So amazing. So on weekends, I'll do something a little more elaborate. If we do coffee a little bit later, and by elaborate, I mean a vacuum pot, because that's one of my favorites. It really serves a great emotional warm fuzzy for me because it's a little more complicated, because it does some mysterious things, and because I once wrote a hired blog for someone about how it works and why you should not call it a siphon pot. I hate that people call them siphon pots because there's no siphoning. So there's a lot of like emotional love I have for them for all sorts of reasons. But really, I love a good full immersion. I don't think I even have a French press anymore. I have another version of a full immersion called a soda soft brew. Same idea, it's like a tea brewer where the filter sits inside the pot and then you add the water and it sits together and brews like tea would brew. And it's a really fine mesh filter. And then what's great about it, like tea, you can just take the filter out. Because the problem with the French press is that it keeps brewing, right? Just because you've pushed the coffee down, it's still porous, so it still brews. But with this, you could take the grounds out, have this beautiful, attractive pot, and then just serve your coffee and have the full immersion experience. I mean, there's still grit, right? You have to still appreciate the grit from the fine dust, but I have no problem with that.
And neither do I. It's interesting. Over the weekend, I was telling you before we engaged in this interview, in preparation for this interview, not only was I, reading The Coffee Trader by David Liss, and of course your book with the other two authors. But on Sunday, I'd asked my family, hey, I want to try 6 different types of coffee prepared 4 different ways. And so we tried various regions, various roasts, and various ways of preparing it. I prepared it through a pour over. I prepared it through a French press, which I do love. I prepared it through a kind of more of a tabletop Bialetti style espresso. Okay. And last but not least, I went Turkish on number 4. And we had a blast, and all of them were totally delicious, very different notes. It's amazing how diverse coffee is. I believe that you are something of a coffee sommelier. I'm not sure what the term would be used for someone who actually knows how to describe coffees. they're different depending on where they come from and how they're roasted. First of all, I understand that this is an incredibly personal question and subjective. What's your favorite coffee and what do you drink daily? I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to ask you others.
So I appreciate taste and the experience of taste. Some days I want something, some days I want something different. So there's no such thing as like the coffee I always want to drink, because some mornings I want a coffee that just tastes like coffee. Simple, paradigmatic, accessible, no big deal. Some days I want something that is so far from coffee you could barely call it coffee because it's so complex and interesting. But in the category of complex and interesting, I definitely lean towards floral. I lean towards things that remind me of apricots and peaches because I love floral in general. I think in anything, I almost always want floral. And it's just, if I can find it in coffee, even better. Of course, I go to coffee conferences and trade shows, and I was at one in Portland. I went to this cafe near where I was staying, and I had this single origin espresso that tasted like concentrated apricot juice. It was so unusual and so amazing. And I thought about it for days. And I went back to a cafe to get another one. A different barista just didn't it just didn't happen.
Isn't that amazing?
It's amazing. And I think that sort of stone fruit experience has lingered with me. So stone fruit and floral is always what I want. I drink a huge range of things because one is, I feel it's a sort of a professional obligation to do so, but also I'm a novelty seeker. I want to taste fun and different things all the time. What do I drink? So I have two companies. One's a consulting company, which I do all sorts of coffee things. And the other one is a very local coffee company for this island, which I do coffee events. I do coffee education. So every week I basically have leftovers from my business, what's available in my business. It's all locally roasted, and it's always a Hawaiian coffee and always a world coffee. So I'm just drinking different stuff all the time. I love it.
Oh, that sounds wonderful.
When I wrote my first book, the book you have is my second book. Or my first book, I remember I wrote this sentence. Some people consume because you have to consume things. And some people consume because there's an added experience there. And for me, there's a very added experience. And
I felt it viscerally when you were describing that experience in Portland of having the first barista make that perfect cup. And you described the second time that you had it as having been, I mean, I felt it actually even emotionally as you were describing it. Like, I remember biting into a meal at a Japanese restaurant a few years ago with a dear friend of mine. And I used to live in Osaka where they just make amazing food. And tears started showing up as I bit into this perfect Japanese meal. And I think because it reminded me of 20 years prior. And I imagine that for you, for coffee, you can have an emotional experience. Like it can actually hit the emotions when it just hits the right note.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you described it so well in that sentence. Like for some people, it's just fuel. For other people, it's almost like a key to the heavens. It makes me so happy to hear.
But, in defense of the rest of the world, it's not just coffee that could do this, right? There's lots of products or things, right? But for some of us, it's coffee, right? And
right. But it's interesting. The United States in particular has an unusual relationship with coffee. I believe we are the top consumers of the product in the world. Yeah. And certainly beginning, I guess, with the Boston Tea Party, we kind of quit tea. It was kind of our individuation from Mother England. Is that consistent with the way you would depict our kind of our historical relationship and leading it to where we are now?
It must have had some impact, right? The Boston Tea Party. But our position in the world and who we were trading with also, right? Getting coffee from the South was much easier than tea from anywhere until we started growing it ourselves, right? I think there's lots of reasons we became coffee people. I suspect that those reasons are valuable and important. It's the Boston Tea Party. I think we like to tell that story. We like to tell lots of stories about our past too, right? Johnny Appleseed. Those weren't eating apples. Those were cider apples. Let's be honest about our history here. There's always a twist, right? That we lose in our fables.
And to your point about the cider apples, that was one of the few ways that we could consume liquids because otherwise we might get a bad virus or bacteria. And I guess that coffee and tea also was a good way to ensure that we were hydrated without getting sick. Is that?
I mean, we say that, and I really want to know more about that idea because that cider thing I've heard too, and certainly beer in Europe, we hear that too. But interestingly, I was listening to a podcast about root beer last week because I really love root beer. And delicious. The women who were leading it had said, when we talk about this idea that people are drinking beer instead of water because it was boiled and safe, it was things like root beer that were like kombucha, right? Yes, it's alcoholic, but it's not really alcoholic. It's not even 3.2. So clean, yes, but not like getting you drunk. But surely if you have lots of spare time and you can brew things, apples seem like a really great thing to brew. You know?
For sure. Right. And we talked a little bit about the psychoactive elements of coffee. Of course, it's stimulating. We all know that. And there are, I believe, I heard you once say that there were about 100 different known chemicals in coffee itself. And then when it gets actually roasted, even more phytochemicals and chemicals are released.
Sorry. Your numbers are way low.
Really? More than that?
So no one's, comprehensively identified all the stuff in unroasted coffee, but probably hundreds of things. It's a seed, right? Seeds are complex. Roasting is pretty magical though. And it does a lot. And the number I like to spit out for context is that there was, at the time that I really thought about these things carefully, there was a paper that came out that showed over 1,000 different chemicals coming from the aroma alone.
Oh my goodness.
Now, most of those aren't things that we interact with.
Sure.
Because we don't have receptors for them or they're such low quantities. But, at least 1,000 alone in the aroma of brewed coffee. Never mind what else is in the brew. It's a really chemically complex beverage, one of the most complex things we consume. So there's a lot of potential for response to it on an individual physiological level, but also, of course, on the taste side, which makes it so exciting.
And what are some of the psychological and physiological benefits that might be associated with drinking coffee?
Well, the easiest one, which everyone knows, is that it doesn't wake us up. It prevents us from getting tired. It's actually a better way of thinking about it. And there's some great mental work showing it improves short-term memory and it makes you learn a little bit better. There's lots of physical stuff in terms of, it has a relatively short half-life, so you can consume it and get some physical benefits in terms of endurance and short-term energy for exercise. There's a slew of medical stuff.
I read some of them and I was shocked by them.
Now, I'm not a medical doctor. Let's make this clear.
Of course,
so,
and neither am I.
Not my specialty. So a lot of coffee research that shows that it helps us delays death, which is a pretty recent one in terms of all the things that it can do. Various cancers it protects against, type 2 diabetes, perhaps Alzheimer's. There's a huge list. I feel like there's always something new coming.
I believe gout was even on the list.
Gout was one of the first ones I think we discovered. So there's lots of things that it seems to help us with. And I don't keep up with this because it's always something else. And it's always this, as a natural scientist who could do experiments on plants and have done experiments on plants, like it's very comfortable and very easy for me to say, but it's not a real experiment. It's like a pseudo experiment, which is valid because if enough people do them in different ways and the data all points to the same way, it probably means something. But you can only say probably means something. We can't confidently say if you drink more coffee, you're going to have less liver cancer.
Yeah. Correlation and causation are different.
Yeah. This look on your face makes me want to tell you the really fascinating thing about coffee medical history, which is for the longest time, we thought coffee made us induced cancer.
I remember that. It was considered carcinogenic at one point.
But that was because back then people weren't accounting for the fact, well, a lot of people who drink coffee also smoke cigarettes, which we know causes cancer, right? So
yeah, and I laugh not at the horror of that, but rather the scientific erroneous conclusion that was drawn.
Right.
Wow, that was
these lessons were hard to learn, and it's unfortunate.
And totally. I mean,
they weren't bad scientists. They were just
were looking at correlation, not causation. So that's a big difference. Before I get to my last question, is there something I should have asked but haven't yet asked?
I think should's not the right word. I definitely have a soapbox that I would like to stand on.
Get on it, man.
You mentioned a really critical word earlier, which is subjective.
Mm-hmm.
And, being an expert in something is really tricky because you spend all this time doing it because you love it, maybe. You become an expert and you want everybody to think that what you have to say is valuable. And when it comes to foodstuffs, you want people to think that what you're tasting, what you think is valuable is important and they should think that too. So you have lots of experts around the world who taste things and they say, oh, these are the best.
Right.
And then happens, right? People put numbers on their bottles of wine and their bags of coffee, and the higher it gets close to 100, the better it's supposed to be, right? And then someone tastes it and they're like, this is gross. I don't like this at all. And all of a sudden there's a problem because how can the experts who are experts say that this is the best thing in the world? I don't like it. And it comes back to this idea of subjectivity and how we talk about our experiences and how we talk about quality. And that, you don't have to like what an expert likes at all. In fact, an expert's role is not to tell you what good is, in my opinion. An expert role is to help you identify what you think good is and help you discover it.
I mean, I'm thinking about just about everything. I mean, I remember wanting to geek out to classical music and I was told by an expert what I should appreciate, and it didn't sound good to my ear.
Yeah.
And similarly, if I asked a weight person for their recommendation on a particular food, it is subjective.
So here's the problem. The good without measurement or definition is very personal and subjective. So when you go into that restaurant, you say, do I get the burger or the fish? How do you know that your subjective likes are the same as the waiter, right? We all do it. We all do it because we expect that everybody's aligned the way we are. Their culture is the same. Their mentality is the same. Their physiology is the same.
Our DNA is somewhat similar. Largely similar, right?
So I'll have people come up to my farmer's market booth, one in coffee, and I can just tell they have a skeptical look. And the first thing I'll say to them is, you may not like either of these things that I'm serving, and that's okay. Which freaks customers out, because the job of a salesman is to tell you that everything that you have for sale is amazing and incredible and it's going to change their world.
Yep.
That's not true. You can't have everything for everybody. So recognizing that's really powerful. So as a consumer, look for guidance. Don't look for answers.
What a great point. And even my own subjective coffee taste, and I'm sure I'll be offending some people out there who don't like what I like and may even consider what I like to be just the bottom feeding of all coffee. And I'm just going to come out publicly and say, I love dark roast coffee. And I particularly love it from Papua New Guinea. I think that is like the ultimate coffee. And that's what I love. And my coffee geek friends just blanch at the idea. They just say, like, that's horrible what you're doing to the coffee. You're burning it and you're taking out all the taste and you can't taste the notes. And it's like, I really like it though. And I don't just like it. I love it. Second to last question. I was wrong. There must be, I know that there are populations for whom coffee is not a great idea. People who suffer from panic, high levels of anxiety, easy to startle, probably not the best candidates for drinking coffee. People certain, I'm guessing, cardiological conditions. I know this is not substituting for medical advice once again, but I'm guessing there are some negative effects of coffee as well, including deceiving us that we've had a better night's sleep than we think we have, than we actually had. Any thoughts on that before I ask my final question?
One of the most amazing things about being a coffee person is that everybody mentions coffee to you in some way once they learn this. Something about them thing, right? So one of the things I've learned, which I've never read about, which I've never heard anybody else mention, but I've heard 2 to 4 times in my life, is that some people are allergic to caffeine. Allergic to caffeine, can you imagine? What a tragedy.
I'm not familiar with that.
But it's super rare. I trust it. People tell me this. I trust them, because why would you lie to someone that you're allergic to caffeine? But that makes sense, right? We have 7 billion people on the planet, right? The odds are someone's going to respond to something, right? Anyway, so people, we're physiologically different. We're going to respond to things differently. Some people respond to something negative. Unfortunate. From my perspective, it's tragic, because the taste experience of coffee is so amazing. You know, no matter how much you force me to try blue cheese, I'm never going to like blue cheese. It just doesn't work for me. It's just that it's one of those things. I just don't like blue cheese. And some people just don't like coffee. Some people just can't drink it. So because of the caffeine, we have found ways to take most of the caffeine out and have great coffee. So if the caffeine's the issue, like, we can deal with that. If there's other things in the coffee that you respond to, which is true, there are a lot of people who actually get an upset stomach from coffee. And there's a suspected compound, and the compound is less frequent in dark roasts, actually. So when people talk about, oh, my stomach is upset, dark roasts are actually probably the best solution for them. And then you get some coffee flavor versus the charred flavor that you love so much. There's no right answer. There's no right answer, just the one.
Totally. So my final question is this. What is your hope for the future of coffee?
This is a timely question, because coffee and climate change is a big topic. And a report came out last week from some friends of mine in the UK looking at to sort of rediscovered a species that tastes really great, but is agronomically terrible. Like, oh, but it has great climate responsibility and great taste. It just doesn't produce very much. So, like, we've sort of discovered this new tool for our toolbox. It's unwieldy right now, but from a biological future of the industry standpoint, like, to me, my hope is that we've worked so hard to convince people that coffee is something that can taste really interesting, complex, and they should pay a lot of money for it, or relatively a lot of money for it. It would be a shame in the next 50 years for us to be like, sorry, none of that exists anymore because we've screwed up the planet. So the fact that we'll be able to keep this message, hopefully, and come up with new varieties or maybe even new species that do all the things we want as humans, right? Because agriculture is not about plants, it's about humans. It's about us manipulating these things for our needs. Coffee will be fine. The planet will be fine without us. Like, climate change is not a problem for the planet. Even though some things will miss out and die, right? But if we're one of those things, then we're one of those things, right? Our own stupid fault. The planet will keep going. It will evolve, and things will evolve to something else. So from the global scientist perspective, like, there's hope for the industry to survive in fun and interesting ways. And there's lots of scientific things of the future that I could be excited about and I could geek out on you with, but are maybe not as specific for this conversation. This idea of subjective versus objective it's a soapbox for me, because I came to coffee as a scientist and as someone who loves coffee. And I learned about it isolated as a scientist. Went out to the world and discovered the way the world was talking about coffee. And it was so incongruous with my knowledge of how we should be talking about things. It led me on this soapbox path of subjective versus objective and quality and all these things. The reason that I'm using this to answer your question is because so many people, right, say what you say. Oh, I love dark roast, even though my coffee runs like it. Like, that shouldn't be a guilt complex. This is not a religion. You get to like what you like. And there's no one who should judge you for that. And if you like something different, that's okay, right? This is a classic human behavior of being afraid of the I don't like, or you're not doing what I'm doing, so you're not doing the right thing. Who cares if you add milk and sugar to your coffee because it's like a candy beverage? So what? My hope for the future of the coffee industry is that we can talk about coffee as this great and wonderful thing without passing judgment and without caring that people do it differently.
So celebrating diversity through subjectivity. I love that. Well, I nice. Am with you 100%. I got to tell you, this has been a blast. I have been so looking forward to this. I loved the book that you co-wrote with 2 additional authors. You. I think Coffee, a comprehensive guide to the bean, the beverage, and the industry is delightful. I listened to it on Audible and I read a lot of it in print. It's, of course, available on Kindle as well. I couldn't recommend it more highly. Shawn, you're just a really cool person. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and your heart with my listeners.
My pleasure, Adam. Thanks for the invite.
This is Dr. Adam Dorsey thanking you for listening to Super Psyched. If you know anyone who might like it or who might benefit from listening, share it. And if you like the episode, please hit subscribe.